Can we please give a huge clap of our welcome to Donald Clark?
Good evening, everyone. No reply. You're such a lively audience a minute ago. I've never been here before. What an amazing place. What an amazing place. Now, you can tell I'm not from this part of the world. In fact, this is as far away as you can possibly get from where I got without getting wet. And tonight, my challenging job, is to make one of the most boring topics in the world interesting, namely chalk. So let's see how we get on with this. I'll just take you back. So I was brought up in Scotland in little mining villages, and all my relatives were miners. And I used to bring back fossils as I was a kid. I got into collecting them. And then 37 years ago, I moved down here. I live in Brighton. That's a long time ago. So I think I'm a Brightonian, really. I've served my time, 37 years. And so I just took up the same thing, took my kids out, to explore this stuff that you're sitting on, I've just always been amazed at the sort of existential issue of us sitting on this tiny eggshell of rock, because not far beneath this is liquid, spinning round on our axis at about 17,000 miles an hour, spinning round the sun at even greater speeds, and an expanding universe. But we never think about that. We never think about the rock, beneath our feet. So that's what I will talk about. So that's on top of my mantelpiece, and the word mantle will come up several times in this talk. Does anybody know of Gideon Mantle? Nobody? Right. You all shall be revealed later on. Oh, sorry, too far. Go back one. Let's take a look back. No, it isn't. There we go. So, Ammonites. Ammonites are really interesting things, to me at least. Hopefully, I'm going to make them interesting to you. And really, in the early 19th century, people were rather puzzled by these things, and they called them snake stones because they thought they were really fossilized snakes. In fact, they went so far in places like Whitby, like Regis, to carve little snake heads on them, and they were regarded as lucky charms. So we were a bit puzzled by this particular fossil. In actual fact, the word Amun and Ammonites comes from the god Amun-Ra, whose house really is this temple in Luxor, where I just happened to be last week. So I took these two photographs to give you a link here. But the word Ammonite actually comes from the god Amun-Ra because of the round horn inside of the god's head. So that's the origin of the word. Now, there's a place I discovered very early when I moved down, and I'm amazed that nobody in Brighton knew about this, and it's near Peacehaven. And has anybody heard of the giant ammonites of Peacehaven? No. No, good. I'll show you them. This ammonite was about the size of me. It got up to about 1.8 meters, okay? And it free floated in the ocean about 80 million years ago. And it was almost the size of a smart car. It was absolutely huge, this thing, okay? Huge tentacles coming out the bottom. And you can find about 20 or 30 of these lying about on the beach in Peacehaven. I don't know why people don't know about it, because, wow, take your kids there, take your grandkids there, whatever. This is an example. You can see the round bit here. These are just lying on the beach, embedded in the chalk, just above the green sand, which is the rock beneath Hastings. We'll come to that in a minute. That's my dog, by the way. Dog, the Schnauzer. But you get an idea of the scale of just one of these things. This is just a portion here. And these are the little sutures, because ammonites floated by having gas within the chambers of the ammonites so that they could float through the ocean and eat what they had to eat. Some of these things are absolutely amazing. There's the cliffs in the background. And once you get down there, you start spotting them, and they're everywhere. That's the cast of one, as you can see in the chalk, with the algae on top of it. Several examples here as well. They're huge. That one's actually in the chalk right on the beach here, but you can see the round shape here. The hole in the middle is a dead giveaway when you're looking on the beach. Oh, sorry, right, skipped a wee bit forward there. Never mind. Now, within the chalk, of course, there are also these things, which is flint. Flint is really unusual and a bit puzzling. It puzzled people for centuries, really. But flint is really the silica from the spines of sponges that turned into liquid and crept through the chalk until it had a hard area and then formed into nodules. Okay? But these are actually flint representations of lobster tunnels. So lobsters lived in these. So when you see those little odd shapes in the rocks, they're really very ancient, 80 million years old, lobsters, lobster oils. These were a puzzle to geologists. So in the chalk, that was formed all those millions of years ago, when this land was down near the Mediterranean, they found these little pebbles. Now, pebbles are worn. Chalk is actually the descent of tiny animal skeletons to the bottom of a warm ocean. When they found these pebbles, they were a bit puzzled. Any idea what these pebbles, why those pebbles are there, or what function they had? No? Sorry? Excellent. Well done. So, the creatures, plesiosaurs and other reptiles that were swimming around the ocean then, had, like cows or some other mammals, stones in their stomachs to aid digestion. And of course, when the rest of the skeleton disappeared, all that would be left would be those rounded pebbles from the stomachs of what were ancient creatures. Spot on, well done, give that man a cigar. If you want to know where these are, by the way, then just down on the east side of Peacehaven is this amazing structure built into the chalk. And you can walk from the top all the way down. You can see the scale of this thing by looking at the fence going up here. Absolutely phenomenal site here. So if you have some time between Christmas and New Year, I highly recommend the giant ammonites of Peacehaven. Let's go into the mystery holes of Hope Gap. Anybody know where Hope Gap is? No? Do you guys get out? Hope Gap is here. This, to me, is one of the finest views in England. You know that view across the Seven Sisters beach head? You guys are just round the corner there. But this beach right here has these things. I'm going to stand over here a bit closer to this so it works better. Now these are perfectly round holes, okay, in the chalk. And for many years people thought these were man-made. Any idea what formed these perfectly circular but a metre wide holes? Any idea?
Ammonites were in there, then they moved.
Good guess, but unfortunately not.
Water spouting up.
Sorry?
Water spouting up.
You're getting close, other way around.
Oh, meteorites.
Meteorites! Nope. Okay, let's show you a few more of these. That's my dog again looking in the hole. They're full of water, right at the bottom. There's loads of them. Around there, okay? The truth of the matter will be coming up now. You see that brown stuff on the top of the cliff, which is just behind this site? That's called loess, and it was fine dust and rock from the last ice age. When the rain falls, it falls through that stuff, and it gets slightly acidic. And it forms little puddles on the top of the chalk, and those puddles eat into the rock and go down and down and down until they form a solution pipe, which is basically a pipe in the chalk. And the physics is such that it creates a perfect circle. So when the chalk is eroded away at the front here, then you get those bottom of the pipe type phenomenon here. So it's a purely natural phenomenon, simply formed by pools of acidic rain eating through the chalk. And all you're seeing is the bottom of the pipe. Okay? This is more interesting, I think, if you're interested in archaeology, along at Seaford. About a year and a half ago, there was a massive rockfall at Seaford. But what it showed, what it gave you a cross-section of, essentially, was this amazing Iron Age fort. So you can see up in the top left-hand corner here, a little dip, which is the trench, and then some of these are actually solution pipes. But if you see those holes up here, there is some evidence that they were places that Iron Age people stored grain. So in the Iron Age, if you didn't store grain and the winter came, you were in real trouble. So what they would do is put their grain in these pits. They were often trapezoid form, a wee bit wider at the top and the bottom. You can see that in some of them. And they would seal it up. The outside of the grain would rot a little, eat up all the oxygen in the sealed pit, but the rest of the grain would survive. Quite clever, but it meant survival. And I took my drone out as soon as I heard this, because I suspected it would have shown some of these things, and you can see a couple of them up here. So you can see them in more of a close-up. You can see it's almost capped, that one, Whether it is or not is up to question, but you can see that this is what they tended to do, is have a small hole for the grain going in and keep a little bit of the chalk at the top. So there's some amazing things to see in chalk, if you just sort of have the eyes to see them, as it were. This is on top of the chalk, just along there actually is this amazing looking sculptural thing, which is a beacon for all the airplanes coming into the southeast of England. It's actually a redundant system now, but they keep it because GPS works. But interesting nevertheless. Now, one of my favourite places in Sussex is Stanmore Park, which is just outside Brighton. It was bought by the council, and it's a wonderful place to walk your dog, or whatever. My dog again. My friend John Helmer says that's the most Scottish fucking dog you've ever seen in your life. It's almost, he does seem to be really very Scottish. But if you go to Stanmore Park with your dog, then fish around there, because the interesting thing about chalk is it has no rivers, because what is porous. So unlike Scotland, where I come from, there are rivers and burns everywhere, there are no rivers, apart from the ones that have sliced through the chalk, of course, through the downs to get to the sea, and so on. But there are amazing things to see because of the chalk. One are these gun emplacements. If you go in the middle of Stanmore Park, you'll find this ammunition everywhere. This is 20mm ammunition from the Second World War from AK guns, and there were placements everywhere along the coast here, but specifically in Stanmore Park, just on the lee side of the down, so you could see the aircraft coming before they saw you. There's lots of stuff about it. And right next to it, my dog again, is this huge hole. Some of these holes are up to 250 foot deep. Because there was no water, you had to drill 250 feet to get to the water table. So if you wanted to live there, you either built those little dew ponds that you see all over the downs, or you dig deep. And this one is a well, and if you stick your mobile phone on the side, you can take a picture like this, and this goes on. You drop a stone, it's just immense how long it takes the stone to get to the bottom. So you would never know it was there. Just up the road from this is a Romano-British camp. I mean, these places have been occupied. If you go around Stanmore Park, you find everything from Bronze Age burials right through to the modern age. But you just scrape the ground and you'll find something, again in the chalk. This is really interesting though. There's only one of these in the whole of the UK. It's called a runoff. So remember, there's no water on the chalk. And they built Stanmore House there. This beautiful, huge Palladian mansion. Where did they get the water from? Well, sorry, that's gone off a little bit. What they did was built this football-sized area, like a football pitch, and all the water ran off into a ditch, which went down through a chalk and charcoal filter into huge Victorian tanks underground. There's only one of these in the whole of the UK, and you can find it in Stanmore Park. It's an absolutely astonishing feature. I don't know why people don't highlight it more, but it's there. And of course, the other way you get water on the downs is to put some clay down for your cattle or sheep and build one of those. This actually happened to me. This is one of my favourite places in the downs. I was taking a picture, and this girl came out. I was miles away on a telephoto lens, and she has Wellingtons and did a handstand. It's the most Brighton thing I've ever seen in my life. Who does that? Who does that? It was a good shot nevertheless, but you can see the sort of chalk type. The lens people have to go to retain water or get to water. It's amazing things. This is the runoff, the football-sized pitch. The water comes off a slope down here, goes along a channel, and then goes into these huge tanks underground. The tanks are enormous. We've only recently gone down inside them, and the scale of these things has shocked people. They're huge. That's the little runoff at the bottom of the thing. Within about 200 yards of that, there is this little building. Inside the building is a well. And that well is... You did it too far with that. You can see the bottom here, that little moon shape. That's the bottom of the well. It's 252 meters deep. Sorry, feet. And in the bottom there, that was all hand carved. Men actually went down there and carved all the way to the bottom. What's even more amazing is there's a wheel next to it, and this was manned by a guy who stood in it, well, various men, for 30 years. 30 years, bringing the water up. That was their job. Unbelievable. the lengths you had to go to. There's one just across the road that was actually a horse engine. They eventually, of course, dug another well nearer the house and used a horse to get the thing back. Okay. Now, the Butchers of Boxgrove, if you go further along the coast in the chalk, there is my favourite archaeological site of all time, because it's the early evidence of bones of human beings on our land, the British Isles. And at Boxgrove, we found hundreds and hundreds of Stone Age axes going back to the Flint. Why was this such a populous area? Even 500,000 years ago, that's when these people were here, Homo heidelbergus, why were they there? Because of the flint. And flint's an amazing tool, but it's an amazing tool because you don't have to carry it around. If you learn how to knap, you can make it on the spot. And they found some wonderful things here. This little scatter here is formed when somebody actually crouched down and made a tool on the spot. So it's a U-shaped scatter from someone 500,000 years ago who made a flint tool to butcher a horse on the spot, not far along the coast from me here. And these were the tools they found in that one area, that one archaeological site. Absolutely astonishing. I actually did find a Neolithic tool myself. This is my favourite possession. You know, if my house was on fire and you said you're going to save one thing, I'd save this. I found it near Alfriston. It was a typical tear-shaped tool. Now, interestingly, about living in Brighton with Ammonites, one of the things I noticed very early on, you may have noticed this if you're in Brighton, if you look upwards, is the predominance of these Ammonites at the top of these pilasters. Now, this is actually Gideon Mantell, remember that name? Gideon Mantell lived in Lewis, and this was the first example of Ammonite pilasters by an architect called Ammon Wilde, in fact. If you go to Brighton, you'll see them everywhere. That's on the Old Steine. That's at the bottom of the Old Steine, behind now Jury's Hotel. These are the ones at the top, beautiful looking things here. That's down Preston Road, where all the restaurants are. This is amazing here. I think it's maybe over elaborate as a piece of architecture, but it's a great street here. There's hundreds of these things along the top here, following in that tradition. These are really beautiful, I think. And then my favourite up in Mosque Place, and perhaps my favourite house in Brighton. I'd love to live there. The pilasters and the palm tree in the front there. Absolutely fantastic looking things. So they're everywhere. But on the Steine itself, you see these, and just up the road, 100 metres to the left, is the house which Gideon Mantell lived in. And if you look down here, there's a little plaque saying Gideon Mantell, geologist. And he's an amazing guy. An amazing guy because he got written out history books in terms of the theory of evolution, but was cardinal in terms of its development, and I'll explain why. There were, in fact, 3 people I hugely admire who were written out history books in terms of the development of evolution. One is William Smith, who was an uneducated man, but was in charge of piling the railways through Britain and identified that fossils lay in strata and that fossils were indicative of the age of the rocks. This is a fundamental finding. You don't get any Darwin without that big little piece of evidence. Mary Anning, you've probably heard of her, from Lyme Regis, who was an astonishing scientist in herself, but has been luckily resurrected. If you go to the British Museum, you can see her fossils, and Gideon Mantell from Lewis and Brighton. And William Smith came up with the first geological map in Britain, which was literally stolen from him, misattributed. He was never allowed into the Royal Geological Society by the aristocrats that ruled it at the day, but this is pretty much what we get today. This is a huge 6-foot thing that I have in my kitchen, much to the chagrin of my wife, and whenever I go I look at this because I like to know what the rocks are beneath my feet, if I go somewhere. This is Mary Anning up the left. You can find her fossils in the British Museum. It's a rather, I really don't like the film Ammonites, but if you want a representation of it. The reason I don't like the film is her living relatives really objected to the film because it was portrayed as a lesbian love affair, but there's no evidence that she was, and therefore I think rightly her relatives were pissed off, to be honest. Now, Gideon Mantell himself, what was he famous for? Well, in the rock that is beneath your feet now, below the chalk, slightly older, 140 million years ago, his wife discovered 2 teeth. And these two teeth, he immediately recognized as the teeth of a very large creature, which we now call a dinosaur. In fact, he noticed that they had a sort of similarity really to an iguana's teeth, which are tiny, but much, much bigger. So he named this creature an iguanodon, which literally trod upon the streets of St. Leonard's about 120 million years ago. You would have found lots of them around here. They were herbivores. These teeth are quite large, and they were critical in the history of evolution and the way we think about evolution. You can find these iguanodon prints in Hastings. This is actually taken from the beach on the far end of Hastings. Anybody seen the iguanodon prints here? They're fantastic. They really are fantastic. You can find plenty of them down on the beach. And that was a cast of an iguanodon feet. So these things were huge, 10 meters long, but twice the height of me, weighed several tons. They were everywhere. But the great thing about the British Museum and others now is the resurrection of those three figures in terms of the history of evolution. And this now is the Mantellus iguanodon, named after him. His nemesis, the guy who started the British Museum, was a creationist who denied all knowledge of these people, who literally stole their intellectual copyright, as it were, pretended it was his, and it held back actually thinking. But when Darwin came along and threw Lyell and others on the beagle, came back, and we have Darwin's dangerous idea, perhaps the most interesting scientific discovery in the history of our species. And the people who really made that possible were the people who searched day in, day out for the fossils in this area to discover that there was progress, that the iguanodon was extinct, that there is a concept of extinction, which is important in evolutionary theory, which is why I admire those people so much. And indeed, I have an ammonite mantelli on my mantelpiece, literally in the middle. And that's why I'm so passionate about rocks. It's the stories they tell, the places you can go and see them, but really what they tell you about our intellectual and cultural history and how we got to that astonishing conclusion that we were no longer the center of the universe, that we are just mere animals, evolved beings, that this brain you have is just an evolved organ that just happens to become self-aware of where it came from. But that only happened in 1859. 1859, that wasn't long ago. But without the people I admire, it wouldn't have been possible. So hopefully I've got some of my passion across about fossils, but more importantly, some of the people who spent their lifetime finding these things and making science possible. So hopefully you've got some places to go between Christmas and New Year. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.